The gas gauge was practically kissing empty, and the sun, a fiery orange orb, was rapidly sinking below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the deserted stretch of Route 13. I'd taken this back road as a shortcut to my cousin's house, a decision I was now deeply regretting. Miles of dense, whispering forest lined either side of the cracked asphalt, and the only other living thing I'd seen in the last hour was a startled deer. Just as I was about to resign myself to running out of gas in the middle of nowhere, a figure emerged from the gloom ahead, a lone hitchhiker, standing by the side of the road, his thumb out. My gut screamed to keep driving, to speed past and not look back, but the fear of being stranded in the darkening woods, combined with a strange, almost magnetic pull, made me slow down. It was a mistake I would never forget. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Hitchhikers were a bad idea. Everyone knew that. But the nearest gas station was at least 20 miles away, and my phone had no signal. What if he knew where the next town was? What if he was just a regular guy down on his luck? The logical part of my brain battled with the primal fear. I pulled over, a cloud of dust billowing around the car. The figure started walking towards me, slowly, deliberately. As he got closer, I could make out more details. He was tall, dressed in a dark, worn trench coat, and a wide-brimmed hat obscured most of his face. Even from a distance, I felt a profound sense of unease radiating from him. He reached the passenger window and stopped. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his head slightly tilted, as if listening. I couldn't see his eyes under the brim of his hat, but I felt their gaze, cold and unsettling, boring into me. "Need a ride?" I asked, my voice coming out a little too high, a little too shaky. He nodded slowly, a single, deliberate movement. His silence was unnerving. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to sound normal, trying to ignore the frantic pounding of my heart. He raised a gloved hand and pointed down the road, towards the rapidly darkening horizon. He still hadn't spoken a word. "Okay," I said, trying to convince myself this was fine. "Hop in." He opened the passenger door. There was no sound of a latch clicking, no creak of the door. It just seemed to swing open silently. He slid into the seat, and the car seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if an immense weight had just settled inside. He pulled the door shut. Again, no sound. He just sat there, perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his face still hidden by the hat. The air in the car was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the frantic beat of my own heart. "So," I said, trying to fill the void, "where exactly are you going?" He didn't answer. He just turned his head slightly, and I felt his gaze intensify. I still couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them. They were cold, ancient, and filled with a profound, terrifying emptiness. A faint, sickly sweet smell began to permeate the car, mingling with the scent of old leather and stale air. It was cloying, metallic, like damp earth and something else, something rotten and sickly. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. This was a mistake, a huge mistake. I sped up, wanting to get to the nearest town, to any sign of civilization, as quickly as possible. The trees blurred past, their shadows dancing in the fading light. Then, a new sound. Faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the passenger seat. It sounded like a fingernail gently tapping against the dashboard. My eyes darted to the sound. The hitchhiker's gloved hand was resting on his knee, unmoving. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the dashboard, or perhaps from behind the dashboard. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it wasn't a loose wire. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was a demand. And then, a low, wet chuckle echoed through the small space of the car. It was deep, raspy, and filled with a chilling amusement. It wasn't human. It was too ancient, too distorted, like something that hadn't laughed in a very long time. It seemed to come from the hitchhiker, but his body remained perfectly still, his head tilted. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The car surged forward, the tires squealing faintly on the asphalt. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, swallowed by the rapidly deepening darkness. Then, a faint, shimmering outline began to form on the passenger window, like a ripple in water. It was vaguely humanoid, but elongated, distorted, its limbs too long, its head too small. It was the reflection of something that wasn't there, or something that was always there, just unseen. The tapping intensified, becoming a frantic scratching, and I could hear a faint, wet thudding sound, as if something was pressing its entire body against the inside of the dashboard. The sickly sweet smell became overpowering, making me gag. I finally saw the faint glow of lights in the distance. A town. Relief flooded through me, momentarily pushing back the terror. But then the hitchhiker moved. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his gloved hand. He reached out not towards me but towards the dashboard. His long, slender fingers, still covered by the glove, seemed to phase through the plastic, disappearing into the darkness behind it. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. And then, a single, heavy thump echoed through the car. It sounded like something large had just been dropped. A low, guttural moan emanated from the dashboard, a sound of profound, unbearable agony. It was followed by a wet, tearing sound. I screamed, a raw, primal scream that tore through the silence of the car. I didn't wait. I swerved the car violently, pulling over to the side of the road with a screech of tires. I threw open my door and burst out into the night, not bothering to look back. I ran blindly down the road, not caring where I was going, only that it was away from that. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station, until I was under the harsh, fluorescent lights, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I never picked up another hitchhiker, and sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I still feel that cold presence, and I hear the faint tap, tap, tap from the dashboard, and that chilling, wet chuckle, a haunting reminder of the stranger on Route 13. The coastal highway was usually bustling, but today, a thick, soupy fog had rolled in, swallowing the world in a shroud of gray. My visibility was down to mere feet, and the rhythmic sweep of my wipers only seemed to smear the moisture across the windshield, making things worse. I was on my way to visit my grandparents, a familiar drive that had suddenly transformed into a disorienting, claustrophobic tunnel. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over, but the thought of sitting alone on the side of a deserted road, enveloped by the swirling mist, was almost as terrifying. Then, through the swirling gray, a figure materialized directly in my path. A woman, standing motionless in the middle of the road, her back to me, as if waiting. My foot slammed on the brake, my heart leaping into my throat. The encounter felt less like an accident and more like an appointment I was now forced to keep. My car skidded to a halt, inches from her. I leaned forward, peering through the fog-streaked glass. She was dressed in a long, dark coat. Her hair, even from this distance, seemed impossibly long and dark, cascading down her back. She didn't move, didn't react to the screech of my tires, just stood there, perfectly still. "Hey!" I called out, my voice muffled by the closed window. "Are you okay?" No response. She remained motionless. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This wasn't right. Who stands in the middle of a highway in dense fog? I considered just backing up and driving around her, but the thought of turning my back on her, even for a second, felt profoundly wrong. I slowly, cautiously, opened my car door, the chill, damp air immediately seeping into the warmth of the interior. "Excuse me," I called out again, stepping out onto the asphalt. "Are you lost?" She slowly, deliberately, turned her head. My breath hitched. Her face was pale, impossibly smooth, almost featureless. Her eyes were wide, black, and seemed to absorb all the light, like bottomless pits. There was no expression on her face, no hint of emotion, just an unnerving blankness. She didn't speak. She just stared at me, her head tilted slightly, as if she was studying me. The silence was heavy, oppressive, broken only by the drip of moisture from the trees and the faint, distant sound of the ocean. A faint, sickly sweet smell began to permeate the air, mingling with the dampness of the fog. It was cloying, metallic, like stagnant water and something else, something rotten and sickly. I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for my car door. Are you all right? I stammered, my voice trembling. She slowly raised a hand. It was pale, slender, and seemed impossibly long. Its fingers tipped with nails that were too dark, too sharp. She pointed, not at me, but past me, into the swirling fog that enveloped the road behind my car. I hesitated, my eyes darting to where she pointed. The fog was so thick I could barely see the taillights of my own vehicle. What was she pointing at? Then, a new sound. Faint, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from deeper within the fog, from the direction she was pointing. It sounded like something heavy being dragged along the asphalt. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it wasn't a car. The scraping grew louder, closer, and then, a low, guttural moan, filled with an unbearable agony. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was too deep, too distorted, like a sound ripped from something ancient and suffering. The woman in the fog remained motionless, her black eyes fixed on me, her hand still pointing. A faint, wet chuckle echoed from deeper within the fog, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't wait. I scrambled back into my car, slamming the door shut. My hands fumbled with the ignition, my fingers numb with terror. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, not caring about backing up blindly into the fog. As I started to move, I glanced at the rearview mirror. Through the swirling mist, I saw it. A hulking, indistinct shape emerging from the fog behind where the woman had been pointing. It was massive, dark, and seemed to move with a slow, deliberate shuffle. It was dragging something long and dark, leaving a faint, glistening trail on the wet asphalt. The woman in the fog was still standing there, perfectly still, her head now tilted towards the emerging shape. Her black eyes seemed to glow faintly in the gloom. I slammed the car into drive and sped forward, not looking back, not caring about the fog, only that I was away from that. I drove blindly, my foot pressed to the floor, until the fog finally began to thin, until I saw the first distant streetlights, until I was back among the sounds of the living world. I never drove that coastal highway again when the fog rolled in. And sometimes, when the mist hangs heavy in the air, I still see her. The pale woman with the black eyes, standing motionless in the road, pointing into the swirling gray, and I hear the faint scrape, 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 and that chilling, wet chuckle from the depths of the fog. The late afternoon sun was a warm balm on my skin as I jogged through Willow Creek Park, my headphones blasting my favorite playlist. It was my usual route, a familiar loop of winding paths, towering oak trees, and the distant murmur of city life. The park was never truly empty, even on a weekday, with dog walkers, cyclists, and the occasional stroller-pushing parent. It was a place of comfort, a green oasis in the urban sprawl. But today, as I rounded a bend near the secluded pond, I saw him, a man sitting alone on a park bench, perfectly still, his back to me. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, yet a sudden, inexplicable chill snaked its way up my spine, silencing the music in my ears. He felt like a static charge in the air, a disruption in the peaceful rhythm of the park. My usual instinct would be to nod politely and keep going, but something about his unnerving stillness, the way he seemed to absorb all sound around him, made me slow my pace, a decision that would haunt my every waking moment. I tried to ignore him, to just jog past, but my eyes kept being drawn back. He was dressed in an old-fashioned, dark suit, even though it was a warm day. A fedora was pulled low over his head, obscuring his face. He wasn't moving, not even a twitch. He just sat there, utterly motionless like a statue. As I got closer, The air around him seemed to grow colder, heavier. The sounds of the park, the distant laughter of children, the chirping of birds seemed to fade, replaced by a profound, unsettling silence that emanated from him. I slowed to a walk, my heart beginning to pound. This wasn't normal. People didn't sit like that. Not in a park. I considered turning around, taking a different path, but it felt like I was already caught in his orbit. My feet kept moving forward, drawn by a strange, morbid curiosity. As I passed directly behind the bench, I felt an intense, undeniable sensation of being watched. Not just a feeling, but a physical weight, like invisible eyes were boring into the back of my head. I resisted the urge to look back, my muscles tensed, my breath held. Then, a new sound. A faint, rhythmic tick-tock. Tick-tock. It was coming from him. It sounded like an old clock, but too loud, too close, and strangely distorted, as if the gears were grinding. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it wasn't a watch. The tick-tock grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a faint, mechanical whirring sound. It was coming from inside him, or perhaps from behind him. I sped up, trying to put distance between us, but the sounds seemed to follow me, echoing in my ears. Then, a faint, sickly sweet smell began to permeate the air, mingling with the scent of fresh-cut grass and damp earth. It was cloying, metallic like old iron and something else, something rotten and sickly. I glanced over my shoulder, a quick, terrified peek. He hadn't moved. His back was still to me, but his head was now tilted impossibly far, almost resting on his shoulder. And from beneath the brim of his fedora, a single, black, unblinking eye was visible, staring directly at me. It was too large, too round, and seemed to absorb all the light. My scream caught in my throat. I stumbled, almost falling, and then bolted. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my legs aching, not caring where I was going, only that it was away from that. The tick-tock and the mechanical whirring seemed to grow louder, closer, as if he was right behind me, gaining ground. I didn't look back again. I just ran, through the park, out onto the street, until I was among the crowds of people, until the sounds of the city enveloped me, until I was gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I never went back to Willow Creek Park. And sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still hear it. The faint, rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock, and the chilling mechanical whirring. A haunting reminder of the man in the park and his single, black, unblinking eye.